Okay. Hopefully you guys can see my screen. All right, can you guys see that?
Yes.
Cool. So we're going to get started. This is normally a 2-hour workshop. We're condensing into the next 30 minutes. So what it's really going to provide is a bit of grounding on where we've come from, where we are, and then just a broad overview of the conscious capitalism principles with some broad strokes on their application so you could see how they could be applied in real world settings. Many of you either work for a company or consult with businesses, and perhaps this might be helpful, and you might even have a lot of experience in working with this on the front lines. So capitalism works, period. It's the power to positively change lives is unparalleled. And this is foundational because capitalism is the greatest system for human progress we've ever known. I mean, the data is just overwhelming on that. If you look at poverty rates and how it's been eradicated or just at least reduced over time since the start of the capitalistic market system. If you look at other things like child mortality rates that have gone down significantly because of new medicines, better access to higher standard of living, right? If you look at things like literacy, even education, and how that has reached the far corners of the planet, education technology is putting college level material in the pockets of young people everywhere, and it's helping level the playing field. If you think about just the enormous comfort it's brought to all our lives, right? Things we take for granted, access to food 24/7, heating and cooling of our homes, the ability to connect people far and wide. These are all things that the capitalist free market system has brought to our society, right? Again, reducing poverty, child mortality, bringing literacy and education to people around the planet. Even things like art and culture are reaching areas where they haven't been reached before. And it's helping people create art and culture in certain parts of the world and giving them a broader audience than they ever had before, right? These are all capitalistic driven capabilities and opportunities. And really it's extended our life expectancy by years and years. And we still have more to come, right? With advances in biotechnology and transportation. So it's been a lot of really good and a lot of amazing progress that we've seen. And if you ever read Steven Pinker's book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, he really lays it all out with all the stats and all the data over time. So I think it's important for us to really understand that and come from that place of this it's a great system and it's done so much for us over the past 200 years. This is the credo from conscious capitalism. I'll just read it to you guys quickly on the screen. So we believe that business is good because it creates value. It is ethical because it is based on voluntary exchange. It is noble because it elevates our existence. And it is heroic because it lifts people out of poverty and creates prosperity. Free enterprise capitalism is the most powerful system for social cooperation and human progress ever conceived. It is one of the most compelling ideas we humans have ever had, but we can aspire to do even more. So this is where we get into the flip side. And this ties into the breakout rooms, right? What are some of the positive things you're seeing? In the main room, we had a lot of great things come up about ESG reporting and sustainable agriculture and farming, employee ownership. But then also, what are the areas that we need to improve upon? And there are a lot that we need to aspire to correct and do even better on if we're going to solve some of the challenges that we have, that we're all aware of. This is one of my favorite cartoons here. So you see the gentleman talking to the child in some post-apocalyptic world, and he says, yes, the planet got destroyed, but for a beautiful moment in time, we created a lot of value for shareholders. If you haven't seen this before, it's made the rounds in a lot of publications. And there's some truth to this potentially, right? We could be facing this for all we know. And we have to have the humility and to be honest with ourselves that even though we've come a long way and it's done a lot, it's still not a perfect system. And we have to remember why such a thing as conscious capitalism was even needed in the first place. Why are we all here? Why is this movement important? Because there's still things that have to be done. And there's areas for reform. And some of them need to be done sooner than others. And when you think about some of the areas that we really need to think about in terms of what are we doing and what are we going to do, if we're going to create this evolution of society and a better place for us all to work and live, we got to think about the damage we've done to the planet, right? The monopolies that we've created across industries, the wealth inequality that was brought up in our main room, including opportunity inequality that exists out there. We talked in our main room as well about government and regulation. But what's also happening is a lot of businesses have created these giant lobby machines, right? Which a lot of times go against the interest of the public good. We have to consider that too. Things like low quality food ingredients and animal abuse, right? Tobacco, opioids. That's been something that we need to take a look at. This area of the business model that really relies on our you call it our inability to not stop ourselves, right? The social media, for example, being one of those types of things where companies prey on our ability to be addicted. And you have some other things, tax loopholes and all that kind of stuff, but there are still areas that we know are an issue. There are still gaps we have to fill. And what conscious capitalism is looking to provide is a bit of the groundwork, the steps. Here's the mindset, here's the perspective, here's a different way we can look at it, where we can balance growth and financial security with a closing of some of these challenges, which are just so detrimental to us as a larger society and are hurdles to our evolution. So it's really about bringing the two together and keeping both in mind. So there is a better way to be a capitalist, a way that will create a better world for everyone, a way forward for humankind to liberate the heroic spirit of business and our collective entrepreneurial creativity, so we can be free to solve the many daunting challenges we face. And that is the path we're going to discuss here. So what does it mean to be a conscious business? There are 4 core tenets of conscious capitalism. You can see them here on the screen. It was first created by Whole Foods founder John Mackey and Raj Sisodia, a university professor. They wrote the book Conscious Capitalism. You probably can see it here above my shoulder on the bookshelf behind me. And what we're going to do now is cover briefly each one of these tenets, what they mean, and a bit about their application. And then we'll do a small reflection on each one so you can kind of embody it in your own experience with either your current job or the business that you run, and how are you embodying these, and how are the environments you're in embodying some of these principles. So the first tenet is higher purpose. And really what that means is that businesses should exist for reasons beyond just making a profit. That's your 101 definition. And that means that the world is actually a better place because your business exists. And the way conscious capitalism defines it in terms of an analogy, it says that our body, we need red blood cells to live. Like, we have to have them. If our red blood cells disappeared, we die. But the purpose of our life is to do more than just create red blood cells. So the same thing with businesses. If you don't make money, obviously your business is not going to be around. But the purpose of business is about more than just making money. And I think that's an apt analogy to keep in mind when you think about higher purpose. If you consider the difference between vision, mission, and purpose, so vision is how the world will look once your purpose is fulfilled. This is the vision for the new way of living and working that I am creating. Your mission is the core strategy that must be undertaken to fulfill that purpose. What are the steps? What's the game plan, right? The chunkable parts to get there. And then your purpose, again, is that difference you wish to make in the world. If we look at some examples of purpose statements, you have the Motley Fool. Our purpose is to make the world smarter, happier, and richer. You have IGS Energy. Our purpose is to build a meaningful energy future together. You have, of course, Whole Foods. Our purpose is to nourish people and the planet. And you have First United Bank. Our purpose is to inspire and empower others to spend life wisely. Now, if you notice one thing about these purpose statements, about purpose in general, that it's not something that you can just one day check off and say, done. Yeah, we fulfilled our purpose, we're good. If that's the case, then that's not purpose. As Simon Sinek would say, it's about the infinite gain. Purpose is something that's lasting. It's this vision of what you want to build and create that is so much in servitude that you never really get there, but you're always working towards getting there. And Simon talks about our Declaration of Independence that says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. It's 250 years later, and we're still making progress on it. And in 250 years from now, we'll probably still be making progress on it. It's something that's never done. You don't just check it off. It's infinite, it's everlasting. And that's an important distinction to think about when it comes to purpose. And when you know you're on the right track towards fulfilling or creating a purpose. Why purpose matters? The stats are overwhelming on this. Employee engagement goes up. Companies that have purpose grow faster than companies that don't have purpose. It appeals to our human nature, creates connection. I mean, you call it just your regular win-win-win-win-win across the board, right? And especially now with the pandemic, this is even more heightened than before. If you look at the studies, I read a McKinsey study recently that said nearly 2/3 of employees surveyed recently say that COVID-19 has caused them to reflect on their own purpose in life. And by extension, the purpose of the organizations from which they are employed. And the Boston Globe recently had a headline that said, I want to do things that matter to me, and how the pandemic spurred a search for jobs with purpose. So this is big now. The stats were overwhelming before, and it's only getting greater. And companies are going to have a not just a purpose in terms of a purpose statement in place, but actual measurable action and behavior and values in alignment to that. And this is part of the progress that we're making from a conscious capitalism standpoint. But it also has to be authentically yours. And it can't be a marketing project, right? That purpose washing, because people can sniff that a mile away. And this cartoon here is one I like to think about when it comes to that. So I'll just read along with you here. So people want brands to be purpose-led. We have to show where we stand. We're not just about profit. We have real beliefs and values. So here's our new creative brief. Let's start making ads with purpose. Okay, so what exactly is your purpose? You're the ad agency, you tell us. And this is sometimes what happens. It becomes this PR ploy, right? Where it's created just for marketing purposes and to create some, emotional buy-in ads and those kind of things. And that's all well and good. We don't want to just create our purpose and not have it go out to the world. But it has to be something authentically from within the organization. It has to be created from within. You need buy-in from everyone involved. You need input from everyone involved. And this is something that we need to keep in mind when we think about purpose. So just a small reflection for us here, and think about it a bit on your own. How has higher purpose helped organizations that you have worked with? And what are some challenges that you've experienced in balancing higher purpose with other business priorities? I know there's a balance, and there's always that push and pull there. And a lot of the challenges is some companies don't have them. If they do have them, employees don't know about them, or consumers don't know about them. If employees do know about it or consumers do know about it, they're not inspired by it, or they don't believe it, they don't trust it. These are some of the hurdles that still exist today. And I'm sure, most of us on the line here have come across this in some way or another. So moving on, the second tenet is stakeholder orientation. And this is a fancy way of saying that businesses operate in this larger ecosystem of many stakeholders. And striking the right balance is key. And that's always easier said than done, by the way. So what are the stakeholders? There's employees, customers, suppliers, investors, there's society, and there's, of course, the planet. And I would even say sometimes your competition is part of this larger ecosystem. So conscious capitalism says that businesses should see the value in each of these and view their results across each of these. It's a holistic view of performance. And too often, many businesses strongly favor one area and neglect others. And that's where their balance is thrown off. And that's where, honestly, we go back to old traditional business practices when that happens. I'm sure a lot of these are self-evident. One that might not be self-evident are suppliers. I'll just throw that one as an example. So a lot of times, what do businesses want to do? They want to squeeze suppliers. But if the conscious capitalism approach is, that if having to squeeze suppliers is part of your business model, then your business model probably needs reevaluating, because it's not built around collaboration and win-win, right? And shared victories. So think about that across all of these individual stakeholders and what a holistic approach can look like. And this is also a lot where ESG comes in. That holistic view of how we measure business performance. If you think about some of the stakeholder maps, some of the examples out there, here are a few on the screen from a couple companies that have published them publicly. Here's a couple more that you can see on how they put some of their competing priorities in place. And again, competing is a lot of times the language we don't want to use. These are all part of our ecosystem. We need all of these in order for us to succeed, and they all deserve our attention and they all deserve our care. And that's really the way to view it. So if we think about a reflection amongst the group here, just to think about it on your own, which stakeholder group has traditionally received the most and the least attention from companies in your experience? Employees, customers, suppliers, the investors, community, environment. And what are some creative ways to balance all the competing interests? Now, for a very long time, the Milton Friedman model of investors that dominated our business landscape. The business's only responsibility is to the shareholders. Since that Milton Friedman talk a couple of decades ago, I mean, that's how businesses operated, right? Now we're starting to change the corner on that a little bit. But investors still do matter, right? They still have a place at the table, just not the only seat. And we're showing a lot of data, and the power of this as well is that when you focus on the other stakeholders, especially in the long term, investors actually come out doing better. So you're not neglecting investors by giving consideration to the others on your stakeholder map. It's actually a way to help them reap the best rewards. The third tenet in conscious capitalism is what's called conscious leadership. And to state it simply, conscious businesses cannot exist without conscious leaders, right? That's obvious. It's what holds it all together. It's what creates the vision. It's what keeps the business focused on the higher purpose. And it's where the courage comes from to live these principles, in spite of all the pressure, in a lot of cases, to not do it. I think we all understand that. We're all business veterans, a lot of us here. We know the pressures that leaders face. And a lot of them don't have a lot of room, right? There's not a lot of rope. And it takes a lot of courage to bring some of these elements into your business, a stakeholder orientation, a purpose that you actually embed into your actions and into your values. That takes courage. So in the spirit of acronyms, here's one that we use for conscious leaders. So it's S, strength, E for energy and enthusiasm, L for long-term orientation, F, flexibility, L for love and care, E for emotional intelligence, S, systems intelligence, and S, spiritual intelligence, selfless. And we're talking really here the qualities of a great leader. So you think about strength here, it's that courage I mentioned a minute ago, but it's also that steady hand. It's having that grace under fire, right? We know how important that is in leadership positions. Long-term orientation, we talked about that too. For a lot of us that have been in corporate business settings, it's basically a series of mini lifetimes and constant fires. And such an operational model takes an enormous toll on the psyche and emotional state of the organization. It also rewards those who push and pull the hardest. And it can punish those who resist that constant churn. And this has enormous repercussions for your business. So conscious leaders think long-term. The emotional intelligence part is critical. It's about humanizing others. It's having that relatability to the challenges on the ground, right? You're not separate from what your people are facing every day. You're there, you understand it, you can relate to it. It's that empathy, right? The act of listening, to hear them. And also to say, I don't know, I need help. Where are we missing? It's having that humility too. And the spiritual intelligence and love and care, these are terms that you don't hear every day in the boardroom. And part of the reason I'm part of conscious capitalism is because they talk about these things, because they're really so important. The spiritual intelligence piece, this is where a lot of this happens. It's what I call this moving from the transactional to the transcendent. Because without the spiritual intelligence, everything is still a means to an end. It's, I'll partake in some of these principles, but we're going to grow, right? And we're going to do it quick, and I'm still going to get my bonus, and all these things are going to happen, right? Like that still has to be in place. And there's room for that, but ultimately we have to transcend that at some point. And the spiritual intelligence, in my mind, is where that lies. Where everyone and everything is not just a means to an end, but you feel a connection to everyone and everything, independent of the end. And sometimes a lot of our growth is tied to where our consciousness is, and where our consciousness stops growing, so does our growth from a personal development standpoint. So not talked a lot in business settings, but I hope it will increasingly be more a part of what we talk about and discuss, because ultimately I think we will have to get to that in order to really surpass and make this prominent in the marketplace. So using the Selfless Framework as a guide, what is the one area that you yourself feel you can develop the most as a leader? Is it strength? Is it energy and enthusiasm, long-term orientation, flexibility, love and care, EQ, systems Q, spiritual Q? And what steps can you take within the next 30 days to develop that attribute? Some of the leaders you've really liked working for, what are some of the attributes they have? Some of the leaders you've really not liked working for, what are the attributes that they have missed? And so much of our growth from a conscious leadership perspective is actually comes from being a part of situations or environments where the leaders aren't very strong. Because we know what it's like when that happens. That builds an enormous sense of empathy and understanding. So we can learn from both environments, both positive, great leaders that have been strong mentors and have guided us and shown real appreciation and care, and others who haven't. There's growth that comes from both. So think about where you have been, what you've seen, and how your view of conscious leadership fits into the examples here. And now in the final couple minutes, the fourth tenet is conscious culture. Culture is such a tricky thing to define. I'll use Adam Grant. He's a Wharton School of Business professor. And he says culture is simply repeated patterns of behavior that reveal norms and values. And I guess that makes sense. He also says something very interesting. He says, culture is what people do when no one is watching. So if your superiors or management were always watching what you email, or watching how you act in meetings, or watching your workday, over your shoulder, and we can get into whether they have AI to do that or not, different conversation. But we would act one way in that environment, and then when we're kind of left to our own devices and how we treat others and how we're supporting others, that is what our business culture is, what people do in those situations when no one is watching. And there's no way to underestimate the importance of culture. Whatever value you place on culture, increase it, because it's that important. It's truly the competitive advantage or disadvantage. There's some quotes that I love. I'll share them with you here now about the importance of culture, specifically conscious culture. So PayPal CEO Dan Schulman says, the only sustainable competitive advantage that any company has is the strength of their workforce. You also have IBM, or former IBM CEO, Louis Gerstner, who said, culture isn't just one aspect of the game, it is the game. So think about PayPal, IBM, and just the value they've placed on culture, and really how differentiating it is from an organizational point of view. Data bears it out. Nearly 70% of business leaders agree that culture provides the greatest source of competitive advantage. More than 80% believe an organization that lacks a high-performance culture is doomed to mediocrity, from Bain. An 11-year study found that organizations that focused on shaping their culture outperformed their competitors. Revenues were 4 times higher, stock price was 12 times higher, Net income was almost 800% versus 1%, and return on investment was 15 times higher, Harvard Business School. 4 million employees were surveyed, and companies in the top quartile of employee engagement are 22% more profitable than those in the bottom quartile, according to Gallup. And those on the 100 best companies to work for in the US list showed an annual growth rate of almost 2 times greater in the S&P 500 than those not on the list. And they had 65% less turnover. And we know how much turnover costs companies. So the value of culture is immense. In terms of how you define culture in more tangible ways, course acronyms, here's one that conscious capitalism uses. So it's tactile: trust, authenticity, caring, transparency, integrity, learning, empowerment. And what this gets at is to a lot of our core, deep-rooted psychological and emotional human needs. That's what it's about. Now, what culture is not pay and benefits. It's not driven by perks, right? The coffee in the room, even like the yoga after class or after work, the ping pong tables, the video games, the dry cleaners in the office, right? Access to all these campuses and all these kind of things. That's not what creates culture. It's more personal than that. And I mentioned these human needs, and it's so important when it comes to building your culture. So a conscious culture rises when you can fulfill the deeper needs of people: self-expression, autonomy, a sense of variety, obviously purpose, psychological safety, belonging, appreciation. These are the elements of strong culture, when people feel these things, when they can embody them, when they come to work knowing they have it. That's where a lot of the magic comes in. And you have to cultivate a lot of these work and life principles in your business: resilience, mindfulness, vulnerability, empathy, communication, accountability, authenticity. These are skills that have to be taught if they're not currently present, and they can be. But it's mandatory. A company can't operate, a culture cannot be successful if their people aren't resilient, or if no one's vulnerable ever. No one ever asks for help. If you don't have empathy for your coworkers, if you're just looking out for yourself. Self-preservation is very toxic for a culture. If people aren't communicating well, right? They're always in conflict. No one's accountable for what they say that they're going to do, or for their job responsibilities, self-leadership, right? Or authenticity, if we're all just wearing a disguise or wearing a mask every day. You cannot create a conscious culture unless these things are in place. So think of a company that you've worked in and discuss, and for this case, reflect on any gaps that you've seen between the management and the employee's perception of culture within the organization. That's important. Any gaps that you have seen between the management and the employee's perception of culture within the organization. Because in my experience and the data that I see, there's always this disconnect. Because understandably so, a lot of leaders default to thinking that things are better than they are, because a lot of people behave a certain way around them. When a senior executive walks into a room or walks down the hallway, jumps on a Zoom call, it's not typically a reflective environment of what things are really like. And when they ask questions, and a lot of do listening and they want to get the truth, it's hard for people to be forthcoming. We're human beings, right? We think it might hamper our progress, and am I being too honest, too blunt? So a lot of leaders do default to thinking that things are better than they are. And where have you come across that? Where have you seen that gap in some of your environments? So these are the 4 tenets of conscious capitalism. It's higher purpose, it's stakeholder orientation, it's conscious leadership, it's conscious culture. And when I think about how do I bring all these things together, this is what comes to mind for me. It's really about combining the wisdom principles that lead to an inspired life. These core needs: self-discovery, belonging, purpose, appreciation, kindness, and support, with the business fundamentals that lead to a thriving business enterprise: leadership, teamwork, ownership, accountability. It's in bridging these two worlds together that we can not just alleviate, but transform so many of the challenges we face today as professionals and as human beings. And this is what I think about when I think of conscious capitalism. It's two separate words. It's the higher consciousness of a lot of these wisdom qualities and these spiritual qualities. And it's the capitalism, brute force of just, talent and people and systems and access to resources. Like, both are what's needed. You can't have one without the other. It's hard to sing Kumbaya and then not have a system and a methodology to bring things to the world. And you have to bring things to the world with a certain level of intent and care in order for them to have the desired outcome and result. And that's why I'm so inspired by the movement. That's why I devote so much of my life to the movement. And hopefully this resonates with a lot of you on the call. So that's it. I think we've got 3 minutes to go. I was able to do it in a half hour. Again, it's a 90-minute to 120-minute larger discussion. We would do breakout rooms. We have a couple more slides on some of the tactical approaches and some of the steps, and a lot of the data and things like that we would show. But hopefully this gives you a bit of an inkling. We may do a 102 session at some point down the road, maybe in the fall. And hopefully you guys can come